They say men over 40 stop chasing love. Most people hear that and assume it's bitterness, apathy, commitment issues, fear of intimacy, some kind of emotional failure. But that's not what it is. For a lot of men, it's an awakening. There comes a point in a man's life when silence speaks louder than pursuit, when he realizes that much of what he once called love was actually performance, effort offered as proof, attention offered as currency, validation mistaken for connection. When you're younger, chasing feels like purpose. You believe if you just try harder, show more, give more, prove more, you'll earn the kind of relationship that finally makes you feel chosen. And at first, it even works. Effort gets rewarded. You win moments, you win approval, you win access. But over time, you start noticing the pattern. The more you perform, the more you attract relationships that require performance. The more you chase, the more you attract people who want to be chased. And by 40, most men have enough data to stop lying to themselves about what's happening. They've seen the cycle repeat: the excitement, the investment, the emotional labor, the negotiations dressed as romance, the endless show me you care tests, the subtle punishments when you don't play the role correctly, the way modern dating can turn a man into a service provider instead of a partner. So he stops running, not because he hates love, because he finally understands what love is not. He understands that chasing doesn't create depth, it creates a dynamic. And if the dynamic is built on you proving yourself, the relationship will never be secure. It will only be maintained through more proving. That's why, to the outside world, it looks like men over 40 checked out. But inside, something else is happening. They're reclaiming their energy. They're becoming deliberate. They're learning discernment. And that shift, quiet, internal, almost invisible, is changing modern masculinity in ways the culture hasn't caught up to yet. Here's the first truth you have to accept. Modern romance has become an economy, not just an emotion, an economy. It's packaged, optimized, gamified. It runs on attention, visibility, and stimulation. It's shaped by algorithms, social proof, and short form dopamine hits. In that system, the loudest people get the most traction. The most visually marketable gets the most options. The most performative gestures get the most praise. And for younger men who grew up in this environment, it's just water. They swim in it naturally. But men over 40 often stand at the edge of it with a different memory. They remember when connection was built through shared spaces, mutual networks, repeated contact, and organic familiarity. When you met someone because life kept putting you in the same place, not because an app decided you were a match based on swipes and photos. They remember when dating had friction, but it had structure, when the world had third places, environments outside work and home where relationships form naturally, local communities, hobby groups, social circles that weren't curated for content. Now, the world is different. A lot of connection begins online. A lot of courtship is filtered through screens. A lot of attraction is shaped by perception management. And what men over 40 discover is that this environment rewards novelty more than loyalty. It rewards constant availability more than depth. It rewards charisma over character. And after a certain age, that starts to feel exhausting. Not because a man can't compete, because he's no longer interested in competing for something that doesn't feel sacred. That's the key. The men who step back aren't always the ones who can't get attention. Often, they're the ones who can, and finally see what it costs. When you're younger, you'll pay almost any price for access. You'll tolerate confusion. You'll tolerate mixed signals. You'll tolerate the emotional treadmill because you believe it leads somewhere. By 40, a man has usually paid those prices enough times to ask a more dangerous question. What am I actually buying with my energy? Is this relationship building my life or draining it? Is this love or is this a contract where my worth is measured by how much I chase? That's when the chase starts dying, not from lack of desire, from clarity. And clarity changes the nervous system. There's a biological layer here that no one likes to talk about because it ruins the simplistic narratives. As men get older, they tend to become more emotionally regulated. They've lived through enough disappointment, enough consequences, enough highs and lows to recognize patterns faster. They don't get pulled into emotional storms as easily because they've already seen where storms lead. That shift isn't the flaw, it's maturation. You stop chasing adrenaline and start valuing alignment. You stop craving intensity and start craving peace. You stop confusing chemistry with compatibility. And that immediately creates friction with modern dating culture. Because modern dating culture runs on speed and stimulation. The system wants you restless. It wants you scrolling, proving, performing, reacting. Wisdom doesn't move like that. Wisdom moves slowly. Wisdom watches. Wisdom chooses. So when a man over 40 steps back, the culture doesn't know how to interpret it. It calls it avoidance. It calls it emotional unavailability. It calls it fear. But what if the truth is simpler? What if he's just done paying premium prices for low quality connection? What if he's finally learned the difference between attention and intimacy? Because attention is cheap. Attention can be bought with looks, status, novelty, performance. Intimacy costs something else. It costs honesty, consistency, emotional maturity, reciprocity, and many men reach midlife and realize the dating market is overflowing with attention, but starving for intimacy, so they opt out. Not from love, from the illusion that love is something you can chase and win like a trophy. Here's a hard reality most men don't want to admit until they've lived it. Vulnerability is not always safe. Culture loves to give men advice that sounds noble. Open up. Be vulnerable. Show your feelings. That advice is not wrong. It's incomplete because vulnerability without discernment is self-harm. A man who opens up to the wrong woman doesn't get closeness. He gets leverage used against him later. He gets contempt disguised as honesty. He gets his weakness turned into a weapon during the next argument. And after enough experiences like that, a man learns self-containment. Not because he's cold, because he's careful. He stops giving emotional access to people who haven't earned it. He stops bleeding just because someone asked him to. And that looks like detachment to people who benefit from men being emotionally available on demand. But to the man, it feels like self-respect. It feels like conservation. It feels like finally putting his energy where it produces real returns. His health, his mission, his financial stability, his friendships, his family, his peace. This is why you see so many men over 40 becoming quieter but stronger. Less talk, more structure. Less pursuit, more purpose. They start building a life that doesn't require external validation to feel meaningful. And the myth that scares people is the idea that this means men don't want connection. That's not true. Most men still want connection. They just want it with dignity. They want connection that doesn't require them to abandon themselves. They want companionship without constant emotional taxation. They want intimacy that feels like two adults walking toward each other. Not one person running while the other evaluates the performance. That's the first major shift, the move from chasing to choosing. And if you think that's the end of the story, it isn't, because there's a paradox here. When a man stops chasing, he often becomes more attractive, not because he's playing hard to get, because he's no longer trying to get. He's no longer broadcasting need. He's no longer negotiating his peace. He's no longer giving off that subtle energy that says, please, pick me, please, validate me. Instead, he carries something rare, self-containment with openness. And people feel that. The same way you can feel when someone is calm versus when someone is desperate. Calm isn't silence. Calm is stability. Calm means a man can enjoy you without needing you. That's magnetic because it's honest. But here's where the conversation gets deeper. Men don't stop chasing love just because dating is exhausting. They stop chasing because they finally recognize what they were chasing in the first place. For a lot of men, the chase isn't actually about the woman. It's about the feeling of being enough. From boyhood, men are trained to perform for approval, get good grades, get praise, achieve, get respect, build, win, provide, protect. Then you'll be lovable. So when romance enters the picture, many men unconsciously bring the same blueprint. If I do the right things, I'll earn affection. If I prove myself, I'll be chosen. If I sacrifice enough, she'll appreciate me. And sometimes you do get chosen, but you also learn something painful. Being useful is not the same as being loved. A man can be admired for what he provides and still feel emotionally unseen. A man can be wanted for what he offers and still feel alone next to someone. A man can be in a relationship and still feel like he's auditioning. That's when the chase starts to feel hollow, because you realize you weren't chasing love. You were chasing recognition. You were chasing the moment someone looks at you and says, without conditions, you are enough. And that recognition is something no woman can sustainably supply if you don't have it internally. So by 40, many men stop outsourcing worth. They stop looking for a relationship to fix the parts of them that were never healed. They stop treating romance like a spiritual solution. They start treating romance like what it actually is, a partnership that should add to a life that already stands. This is why it can look like men are becoming emotionally unavailable. But in many cases, the opposite is true. They're becoming emotionally honest. They're just unwilling to invest in dynamics that require them to abandon their center. Now, let's talk about the part no one says out loud, the cost. Because there is a cost to this awakening. When a man stops chasing, he gains peace, but he also loses certain illusions. He loses the excitement of naive hope. He loses the thrill of believing that love is just around the corner if he tries harder. He loses some spontaneity, because spontaneity is hard when you're calculating risk. He loses some softness, because softness has been punished. And yes, sometimes he feels a quiet grief, not for the women he lost, for the parts of himself he silenced to survive the game. The dreamer, the romantic, the guy who used to believe without needing proof. That guy doesn't die. He just goes quiet. And the man learns to live with that quiet. He builds routines. He builds purpose. He trains his body. He tightens his circle. He becomes competent at being alone. And here's the paradox. Solitude becomes both sanctuary and temptation. Because once you get comfortable alone, you start asking, is the average relationship worth disrupting this peace? That's the question men over 40 ask, that younger men don't even know exists. And it's not arrogance, it's math. If you've built a stable life, your baseline is high. Adding someone to that life should improve it, not destabilize it. So your standards rise. You're no longer choosing based on attraction alone. You're choosing based on alignment. You're asking, does she bring peace or does she bring turbulence? Does she respect my mission or does she compete with it? Can she communicate like an adult or does she rely on emotional chaos? Does she add warmth or does she create constant negotiation? And when you start filtering like that, the dating pool gets smaller. Not because good women don't exist, because many people haven't matured into what healthy partnership requires. And that's why men step back. They'd rather be alone than be in a relationship that feels like a second job. Now there's another layer to this awakening: the collapse of fantasy. Young men often chase a fantasy of the perfect woman, the perfect relationship, the perfect feeling. But by 40, a man has usually learned something that changes his entire approach. Every relationship is a trade, not in a cynical way, in a realistic way. You trade time, energy, freedom, attention, emotional bandwidth. And in exchange, you receive companionship, intimacy, support, family, shared meaning. But the exchange must be fair. If the exchange is imbalanced, resentment grows. And resentment kills love faster than almost anything, so the man over 40 becomes more intentional. He stops chasing people who want to be entertained. He stops chasing people who require constant proof. He stops chasing people who confuse drama for passion. He starts looking for something quieter but stronger: mutual effort. Two people who want to build something stable. Two people who can talk through conflict without trying to win. Two people who can disagree without disrespect. Two people who can love without playing games. And when you've lived long enough, you realize that kind of love is rare. Not because people are evil, because it takes development to become that kind of partner. It takes emotional discipline. It takes self-awareness. It takes accountability. Most people want the results of maturity without doing the work. Men over 40 are often tired of carrying both sides, so they disengage from the performance. They step out of the market. They go inward. And when they do, something interesting happens. They start becoming the kind of man love can actually live with, because chasing love doesn't make you lovable. Becoming whole does. That's the part no one talks about. A man who stops chasing creates space for growth. He trains his nervous system to stop needing validation. He learns to sit in silence without needing stimulation. He becomes selective, not because he hates women, but because he respects his own life. That selection changes him. He becomes more stable, more grounded, more consistent. And this is where the message shifts from commentary to instruction. Because if you're a man over 40 or approaching it, this isn't just a philosophical discussion. It's a roadmap. Here's what the awakening actually looks like in practice. First, you stop confusing attention with intimacy. Attention is easy to get in short bursts. It's easy to spark, easy to lose, easy to manipulate. Intimacy requires repetition. It requires trust. It requires a woman who is emotionally safe and a man who is emotionally steady. So you stop chasing women who only offer attention. You start looking for women who offer consistency. Second, you stop negotiating your peace. If you've built peace, you protect it. You don't trade it for a pretty face. You don't trade it for excitement. You don't trade it for a relationship that feels unstable. That doesn't mean you become rigid or closed. It means peace becomes your baseline, and anything that threatens it must earn its place. Third, you rebuild brotherhood. This is where many men go wrong. They replace dating with isolation. That's a trap. Men thrive with a strong circle. You need Men who hold you accountable, who understand your world, who add strength to your life. A man with no tribe becomes vulnerable to chasing again because loneliness makes you compromise. A man with brotherhood can be patient because his life is already full. Fourth, you develop emotional discipline, not suppression, discipline, meaning you can feel deeply without being controlled by feeling. You can want love without chasing it. You can desire without desperation. You can be open without being naive. That's mastery. And mastery is what makes a man dangerous in the best way. He cannot be manipulated through his needs. Fifth, you learn to date with intent if you choose to date at all. You stop auditioning. You stop performing. You stop trying to win someone who isn't equally invested. You move slower. You watch behavior. You prioritize character. You ask better questions. Not, do I like her? But does she have the qualities required to build something stable? Because attraction is easy, compatibility is hard. Now, if you apply this, here's what you'll notice. A lot of women will not like the new you. They like the version of you that chased. They like the version of you that proved. They like the version of you that performed. The new you is calm, selective, grounded. You don't fight for attention. You don't compete for validation. You don't negotiate with disrespect. And that will repel the wrong women. That's the point. The right woman will feel safer around you, not threatened, because she's not trying to control you. She's trying to build with you. Now let's address the last misconception. Men over 40 don't stop loving. They stop losing themselves in love. They stop confusing love with sacrifice. They stop believing that being chosen is the same as being valued. They learn to love from wholeness rather than hunger. And that's why the chase ends. Not because the heart died, because the mind woke up. So if you're watching this and you feel that quiet shift inside yourself, the one where you're less interested in the chase and more interested in peace, don't shame yourself. You're not broken. You're evolving. The culture will tell you to keep running, keep proving, keep performing, because a man chasing is profitable. A man at peace is not. A man at peace can't be sold fantasy as easily. A man at peace can't be manipulated with attention. A man at peace chooses, and that choice is the beginning of true masculinity. Not loud masculinity, not performative masculinity. The kind that stands still and doesn't apologize for having standards. The kind that can be alone without being lonely. The kind that can love without bargaining. And here's where we end, with a truth that should settle in your chest. Love that is real cannot be chased. It can only be met. Two people walking toward each other, not one running while the other decides. If you want love after 40, you don't need more chasing. You need more alignment. You need a life that is full, a heart that is disciplined, and standards that are clear. Then, when something real approaches, you'll recognize it, not because it excites your anxiety, but because it respects your peace. And if this hits something in you, if you felt this shift but never had words for it, then stay here. Subscribe, because we're not building entertainment, we're building clarity. And comment the keyword peace if you understand why a man stops running so he can finally live.